to Just Energy Radio with your host, naturopath and medical intuitive, Dr. Rita Louise. We have learned from Einstein's theory that matter and energy are one. Physicists believe that all systems in nature have their own particular way of vibrating. From the swinging of a pendulum, to the waves of the ocean, to the light that brightens the sky each day, each of these oscillates at its own unique rate. The same holds true for every thought, feeling, event, or word we speak. Each has its own frequency or rate of vibration. What many of us don't realize is when we take everything in our universe down to its simplest form, it is all just energy. Join Dr. Rita Louise on a journey through time and space where past, present, and future collide. Today, what you believe may be called into question. What we want to know is, who made up the rules? Be brave and step outside the box. We are about to turn our world upside down and venture into the unknown. Hold on. We are departing our own beliefs and entering alternative realms. Enjoy the possibilities.
Hello and welcome to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for tuning into the show today. Well, today we have a very good friend of mine, Michael Tellinger, coming on to talk about his book, Slave Species of God. Curiouser and curiouser. We're going to have to find out all about that and what that means. But don't forget, Just Energy Radio is brought to you by soulhealer.com, where you can find out about all the services I offer, including medical intuition evaluations, energy medicine healing, and intuitive counseling sessions, a.k.a. psychic readings. It's also loaded with all kinds of other information, articles, products. Check it out, soulhealer.com. It's also brought to you by the Institute of Applied Energetics. That's www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com. And if you haven't already gone to check it out or purchase your copy, please do go to the website www.manmadethechronicles and check out my newly released book, which talks about our history from the viewpoint of the gods. And it really explores the mythology from around the world and lets the myths tell the stories. And what a story they tell. Anything but peaceful and harmonious. And very interesting, and I think we're going to get into some of that story here with Michael. So let me tell you a little bit about Michael and get him on the air because he's always a fascinating guest. Michael Tellinger is a scientist, explorer, and internationally acclaimed author who has become an authority on the origins of humankind and the vanished civilisations of southern Africa. New archaeological and scientific discoveries made by Michael Tellinger and a team of leading scientists show that the Sumerians and even the Egyptians inherited all their knowledge from an earlier civilization that lived at the southern tip of Africa more than 200,000 years ago. So the author of Slave Species of God and a couple of other wonderful books, Michael Tellinger. Hey, Michael, how are you?
Excellent, Rita. Nice to hear your voice.
Nice to hear your voice, too. I always love having you on the show. And I want to say congratulations. Your Slave Species book was out. I mean, I have my autographed copy on my desk. But it's actually been released or going to be released in the U.S. market. And I just am so happy for you that your message is getting out there to a bigger audience of people.
Yeah, thanks very much, Rita. It's been a few years that I've been working on my own research and putting my work into books on my own, and finally I was rewarded by being recognized by Baron Cohen Inner Traditions, and they've just signed a deal with me for worldwide rights and release. So that's very exciting. So the book's getting a new life and a new look, and a few edits here and there, and I can't wait to see the new version of the book.
That's great, and it's so comprehensive, and I just can't wait till we start digging into some of the contents of it. But let's just start, because I'm sure anyone that's listening is going, slave species? What do you mean, slave?
Yeah, well, exactly that's why I called it that, to be as bold and as blunt and in your face as it can be, because unfortunately, no matter which way you look at it, when you start looking for the clues that surround the murky origins of humankind, it always comes back to the same point of departure, the same strange circumstances that surround our sudden appearance on this planet as a species. I'm talking about the Homo sapiens species, the human race, and the various sub-offshoots, if you want to call them that, of species that are related to us. Humanoids that may or may not be related to us, right? And that's unfortunately what it comes down to, is that we are, as repeated research points to, is that we are a cloned species. We are not an evolved species as we've been told or suggested, by the works of Darwin and the evolutionary theories of humanity. And this is where it becomes really interesting, because in my many presentations that I've done, I always tell people, the positive news about this is that both the evolutionists and the creationists are correct, because we cannot deny evolution that's all around us, that we see in plants and other aspects of life and on our planet. But at the same time, we also cannot deny the sudden appearance of the species called the human race. And so both creationists and evolutionists turn out to be correct. The fact that the facts differ slightly when it comes to the human race and the evolution of our species and what brought us to this planet. And the word slave species is very specifically put into the title of my book, because that's what we were, created as a slave by beings of higher knowledge and intelligence that came to this planet many hundreds of thousands of years ago for one reason, and that was to mine gold, to find gold and mine gold in huge quantities.
Well, what did they need the gold for?
Well, that remains the question that everybody wants to know. What's fascinating about this, Rita, is that the Sumerian tablets, the thousands and thousands, if not millions, of clay tablets that have been discovered, not all of them have been translated, but a large number of them have been translated, and they all talk about the same sequence of events. And all of human history actually repeats those same sequence of events that we find very graphically described in those Sumerian tablets. And many of your listeners will know the wonderful work of Zechariah Sitchin, and the many books that he wrote about the Sumerian tablets and the origins of humankind and the Anunnaki and their sudden appearance on planet Earth. And the Anunnaki, or the biblical gods of the giants, and all these kind of descriptions that they've been given throughout the ages, that all the ancient knowledge and the wisdom of the ancient civilizations all points to the same departure for the human race, is that our ancestors come from the sky. And that's repeated over and over again. And the one common denominator is that it was gold that brought these beings here. They were obsessed with gold. And I'm specifically here referring to the Anunnaki. And I must also make it very clear up front that the Anunnaki, I believe, also are probably the same group of beings that in the Bible are referred to as the Anakim, or the giants, the Anunnaki, were obsessed with gold. And this is where we get our obsession for gold from. We weren't obsessed with gold as a species we didn't just suddenly decide that we're going to start digging in the ground and finding gold. And all the allurements made to why humans started to use gold in our history books are just so nonsensical, and they just made up stories that they put in our history books that make no sense. There's no reason behind it, and unfortunately, humanity is often driven by reason, or mostly driven by reason as to what it is we do. And we didn't need gold in the beginning for anything. We needed iron. If you think about early primitive man, the way the primitive man is often described, they would have needed iron and hard metals to do work with, but certainly not gold, because we didn't use it for advanced technology the way we use it today. It's pretty much useless to humankind, other than just looking pretty around our necks, or being used in technology, or being traded on the stock markets. So where did humanity's obsession come from, so that we are so obsessed with gold? And it is spectacular, this obsession with gold. It is unbelievable. Let me give you an example. What, often people don't think about this. How far back can you trace human obsession with gold? And it is impossible to separate human history from gold and our obsession with gold. So the example that I often show people is in the Bible, in Genesis. In Genesis 2, just after Genesis 1, when Adam is still alone on earth, and Eve had not yet been fashioned from Adam's rib, there's a wonderful passage where God talks about this wonderful place called Havilah, and he's telling Adam about Havilah, where the land is good, the water is good, and by the way, buddy, there is gold, says God.
There is gold in them there hills, Michael.
That's right. So it's not Adam that was obsessed with gold. He was told about gold by God. And that's when human obsession with gold begins. We get it from the gods and not manufactured or created by humanity. And for those that still believe that the word God in the Bible is a singular, just get that out of your mind immediately. That is nonsensical and absolutely not true. It's a huge lie that's been perpetrated and dumped upon humanity for thousands of years. The original biblical Hebrew word for God was Elohim, and that was the gods, the plural, Elohim. Always a plural. So whenever you read the word God in the Bible, you have to replace it with its true meaning, and that is the plural gods, the gods. And that changes everything. Everything.
It's interesting. A few weeks ago, I had a Rabbi Wayne Dosick on talking about his book, The Real Name of God. And I got the book, and I started reading it, preparing for the interview, and my jaw dropped when I read this. And so his belief is that, when you read the Hebrew and, God is talking to Moses, and God says, well, I want you to do this, God, his belief is that God's name is, and this is his pronunciation, or the Hebrew pronunciation was Anohi. And I'm going, okay, that sounds a whole lot like Anunnaki, don't you think?
All right. Yeah. That's it. Very, very interesting. Well, there's another new twist that is unraveled in this whole, Elohim and Anunnaki and the giants of the gods, because there were the Elohim, the Seraphim, and the Anakim and so forth in the Bible, and various other references to these strange beings and strange creatures that they seem to refer to all the time or several times, and without any explanation, which suggests that when you say, well, the Greeks did this and you carry on, which means that the people of the time today understand who you mean when you say the Greeks. You don't need to explain anything, right? Mm-hmm. So we need to assume that when they wrote that into the works that were written down by the various people, when they referred to the Elohim and the Anakim and the Seraphim and so forth, they must have known who they were, and everybody knew who these beings were. So they did not need to explain anything. And today we have no idea who these beings were. We are starting to rediscover and relearn and re-educate ourselves about their true identity and their link to humanity and their interaction with humanity. The sons of the gods saw the children of man and had children with them, and all kinds of information, interesting passages like that make us realize that we've got to treat the Bible and other ancient texts completely differently to the way they've been sold to us by the popular religions. And this is where the problem comes in, because the religions, all they've done is hijack these books, which are really filled with tremendous amounts of knowledge and information. and they've hijacked them for their own benefit and the control of humanity. And this is where sometimes people try and undermine the knowledge and information that you find in the books like the Bible and the Quran and so forth, and other ancient texts. They try to undermine the information in those books for the wrong reasons, trying to prove them wrong, and God doesn't exist and Jesus didn't exist and all this kind of stuff. That's not really what we need to do here. What we need to do is separate those who set up the mischievous and the devious global religious movements to entrap people, deceive them, and twist the knowledge and the information that is contained in these great works. And they truly are great works of knowledge and information. Because once you start removing what I refer to as the soap opera storyline, like that is sitting on top of that weaves its way through the Bible and also the Quran and many of these other ancient texts as well. If you remove that soap opera storyline and look at the subtext and what's actually what is shared with us, it's phenomenal information. And so I want to come back to the opening line of the Bible once again, because it's fascinating, because the brilliant Michal Ledwith, who I had the pleasure of meeting several times in the United States. He lives near Yelm, Washington, and he's now involved with the Ramtha School of Enlightenment. He's an advisor to Ramtha, to J.Z. Knight. But before he got involved with the Ramtha School of Enlightenment, Michal was and remains one of the finest theologians and theological scholars of our time. This man is a walking encyclopedia of knowledge and information that will just boggle your mind. He was the head of St. Patrick's College in Ireland, of the theological department, and of one of the 13 major universities. And after that, he was also, or during the same time, he was also the advisor to the last two popes, the current pope and the previous pope, John Paul II. And his knowledge of theological works and the Bible and other works, the Sumerian Tablets and so forth, is just absolutely unbelievable. And he made an amazing discovery while he was still a young student at university, studying theology and ancient history and so forth. He found that the opening Hebrew sentence of the Bible is incorrect, because in theological studies, all Hebrew texts have to start with the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, which is Aleph or Alif, the letter A that we would call letter A. And when he looked at the opening statement of the Hebrew Bible, he found that it does not begin with Alif, and that we have been taught a distorted translation of that original Hebrew sentence. When he added the letter Alif to the Hebrew opening line of the Bible, it changes the meaning of that sentence completely. And it goes something like this. The way we've been taught the opening line of the Bible is that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. That's what we've been taught. And that changes dramatically when you add the letter Alif into and put it at the beginning of the Hebrew sentence. And it says the following: the Father of the beginnings created the Elohim, the heavens and the earth. I'll say that again, because this is absolutely fascinating. The Father of the beginnings created the Elohim, the heavens and the earth. And once again, when you start making these kind of discoveries, the lights come on fast and furious, and you realize how we've been deceived by those that have been peddling controlled religions and separating people through religions and the sword and fear, driving fear into people with all lies and deceptions that we're now waking up to very, very rapidly.
Well, one of the things that I find interesting, or that I have people ponder, and I talk about this in my book, there's the big war that happens where basically Enki loses power and Marduk takes over. And if you make a parallel where the god of Christianity is Marduk, or Enlil, whatever name you want to put in there, because, there's translation issues. But if that is the god that took over and is basically in charge and responsible for the whole Bible thing, then it makes Enki, obviously the god of the underworld, the god of the lower world, a.k.a. the devil. And in my mind, I go, well, what if he won? What if his side gained control over what was going on? Then what would our world be like?
Yeah. That translation, for example, I believe is also often misunderstood. And when you mention the god or the king of the underworld and so forth, my understanding of that translation is that he was in charge of the land of the underworld, which was referred to as the southern part of planet Earth, the land or the world below the equator, or the land below, not the land below the earth, below the ground, or inner earth, or anything like that, but more of a reference to geographical positioning, the land below the equator, where the gold came from, and that's exactly where he was, and that's really where my research and where my breakthrough research and findings starts to play a very important role, because that's the link that I've made over the last 5 years, and made the discoveries that can now, without any question whatsoever, be linked to Enki, his vast gold mining empire that was created here in southern Africa, mostly South Africa and Zimbabwe and some parts of Botswana and Mozambique, and many of the structures that have been left behind, physical evidence of this vast civilization. So it's not just translation of Sumerian tablets and thinking this is where it is. This is what my contribution has been, is to present the physical evidence of what Zecharia Sitchin has been writing about for his whole life. We now have growing evidence, and I must stress the word growing, because it keeps getting more and more overwhelming and undeniable that this is it. This is the physical evidence for Zecharia Sitchin's translations, and presents Enki's, the Sumerian entity, deity Enki, his vast gold mining empire that consists of more than 10 million stone structures, thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of gold mines, and then also some other mines, not just gold, but mostly gold mines. And that comes hand in hand with technology and the knowledge of sound and frequency as a source of energy, together with tools and artifacts to support all this, together with electronic and scientific measurements that blow our minds, that support the fact that they had advanced knowledge of using sound and source energy as a source of energy and frequency. And it just gets more and more exciting. And the flagship amongst all this is the wonderful site of Adam's calendar, or as the Zulu shaman Credo Mutwa calls it, Inzalo Yelanga, or birthplace of the sun. And
well, before we get into that, because that comes actually a little bit later in the story, you mentioned that these gods were not from here. Do you have any thoughts of where they came from? Well,
it seems that they came from the constellation or the star systems around Orion. And this is why our obsession with Orion is so strong throughout human history. There are links to other star systems as well, obviously Sirius and Draco and the Pleiades and so forth. But Orion is, as you know, the pyramids in Giza are linked to Orion, but also Sirius and other star systems. My information is that the Anunnaki were linked to Orion, But things are a little, they get a bit fuzzy, because the star systems as we see them today have not necessarily been in those constellations and in that structure a long time ago, that they moved in those positions possibly very recently. And even making a statement like that, a lot of people will go, "Are you crazy? I mean, are you out of your mind? That's not possible." Well, until a few years ago, we had no idea that Sirius was a binary star to our own sun. And now we know that our star, the sun, is in a binary system with Sirius. And, there are still people today that don't know that. And when you first mention it to them, they go, "What? That's nonsense. I've never heard of that." Well, my retort to that statement, which people often use, when you first, introduce them to new information, they say, "What kind of rubbish? I've never heard of that." Well, all you got to do is to tell them, "Look, I've never heard of that" is not a scientific argument. That means you just haven't heard of it, and therefore you're ill-informed, and you must go away and do some more research and do some more reading. And then, now that you've heard of it, go and inform yourself, and don't close yourself off to this information. So, the Anunnaki are interesting. They refer to, as you know, to a planet called Nibiru. I don't know, is it possible that this mysterious planet called Wormwood, that the book of Revelations in the Bible refers to, is Wormwood and Nibiru somehow connected? I don't know. Anything is possible. Our understanding of this is so limited, but at least we're waking up and we're asking questions. And the more questions we ask, the more interesting the answers are that are coming back.
I know. People have just been in that box for such a long time that it's kind of hard for people to, there's the information, and then you have to go, is this something that I can even believe? But I feel like, work like yours and work that's coming out, there's more and more information that kind of fill in this picture, and it's not like these mad claims. I think of someone like Eric von Däniken or Brad Steiger, who were writing in the 70s about this material, or people that were writing earlier than that, and they're saying, "Oh yeah, aliens came to this earth and blah blah blah, made the lines of Nazca." People must have thought they were crazy.
Yeah. Well, Eric von Däniken wrote about that in 1959. I think his first Chariots of the Gods, was first released in the 50s or in the late 50s. It was insane.
Mm-hmm.
I think so. I speak under correction, but I think so. I was astounded to find out how long ago it was. But and so was Immanuel Velikovsky and his contribution to this field, and many other authors, many other researchers and scientists. And what I find interesting is that you find many of the great scientific minds like Albert Einstein and so many Nobel Prize-winning scientists and physicists and mathematicians who suddenly go out of flavor and out of favor with the global media and the global elite. My mind is just racing to find the one name I'm looking for. Paul Dirac, who was one of the Nobel Prize winners in 1933 in the field of quantum physics, together with Edwin Schrödinger. I think they won collectively a combined Nobel Prize. And Edwin Paul Dirac just suddenly disappeared after that. He started, saying some things that were flying in the face of mainstream scientific circles, and very much in line with what we're talking about here, and talking about that science should follow the laws of nature more elegantly, and unless you use or apply the laws of nature in your scientific studies and applications, you're going to find it difficult to find the solutions. And he was making statements that absolutely resonate with me, and make me very happy to discover those kind of things, because that's not what the general population is aware of. And I also then encourage people to go read about Albert Einstein and Dirac and Schrödinger and these great scientists over the last 100 years or so, and find out what they thought other than what we are told by mainstream media. Because you will find that most of them believed everything that we discuss on these so-called alternative media radio shows and TV programs. They believed in aliens. They believed that we've been visited by extraterrestrials. They believe there's infinite life forms in the universe, that it's teeming with life, that travel beyond the speed of light is possible, that time travel is possible, that different dimensions, multiple, infinite number of dimensions exist in parallel times and different timelines and all these weird and wonderful things. But that did not wash well, as it does today, with mainstream media and those who try and control our thoughts and what we do and how we live. So very quickly, these great minds, they get rewarded with a Nobel Prize, and then very quickly they get shoved aside because they don't continue, promoting mainstream thoughts. And that's beautiful when you see that.
Well, one of the things, you're talking about fairly contemporary scientists, but even in current times, they've interviewed people that came from that are from the Dogon culture who, I don't have the exact year, but in the early 1900s, they made claims that Sirius was a binary star by itself, and, everybody poo-pooed them, and this is a bunch of crap, and then they finally found the binary star, and Carl Sagan on record said, well, somebody probably told them about that, and that's why they, added it into their cosmology.
Yeah. Unfortunately, this is the moment you start, doing research in these areas, human origins, ancient human history, the moment you start dealing with mainstream academia, they will always try and find some ridiculous story to try and align it with their own limited ways and limited thinking. It's spectacular. I saw just the other day a documentary on Discovery or one of the channels about SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. That is that huge installation, as you know, that huge radio telescope that they're looking for, radio signals or any other kind of frequencies out there that would suggest intelligent life, like the movie Contact with Jodie Foster, one brilliant movie which is deeply encoded with advanced knowledge and information. And I think we must talk about that as well. The encoding of the artworks throughout human history and the encoding of the movies, which is just a continuation of that practice and habit, which is just spectacular, Rita. When you discover the deep levels of encoded knowledge and information and messages in our movies today and our TV shows, it blows your mind beyond belief. But I'll come back to that. We're talking about Contact. Did I lose my train of thought now or what?
Well, we were talking about the knowledge that is coming forward.
Yeah, I was talking about this guy who's now the current head of SETI, right? So you can see the modus operandi here so beautifully. They find some hick astronomer that is as conservative and lives in a small box, and they make him in charge of SETI, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. Somebody that has no vision, no imagination, knows nothing about quantum physics and the laws of nature. When you mention the word sacred geometry to him, they'll probably think you're talking about some religious cult, or something like that. And he starts spewing forth the same kind of nonsense about, the closest star to us is Alpha Centauri, and that's like 5 light years away, so it's going to take so long for them to travel through space and time, and it's impossible for anybody to reach us. So when they ask a question, are we being visited by aliens, the answer is absolutely not. It's just not possible. And this is the kind of crap that he spews forth. So you can see the plan here. They get these kind of people and they put them in charge of these major installations, so they go on record and they make these statements. And it is just unbelievable. And they get away with it.
But you also hear the stories of people in the field making claims that fall outside the box and their reputation's being ruined, and they find no work and can get no research grants, and they're basically blackballed from their field of study.
Yeah, and by recognizing that, you see exactly how the royal political elite have taken control of every aspect of society, and that, I'm discovering that more and more on a daily basis because of my, involvement in the legal actions against the banks here in South Africa and the South African Reserve Bank, and being in the Supreme Courts and the Constitutional Court many times now, realizing how tightly wound up and closed this circle of control is. It is spectacular. It is truly a spectacular deception that we've been entrapped in. The system is so locked down, so closed in by the royal political elite, which includes the banking families, of course, the energy companies, the pharmaceutics, and the media, the mainstream media, and they just manipulate the entire system. It is so spectacularly closed in that my experience over the last 12 months has blown my mind. Whatever I might have thought before with my research, and as open-minded as I am, having physical and personal experience looking at the banking system, the legal system, the development thereof, how it's applied today, the energy, the free energy systems that are out there, how the petroleum and energy and the electricity supply is controlled, how every avenue, every channel, everything is so connected and interwoven and so controlled on every level. It is quite spectacular. I have no other words for it. These guys have done such a great job. You've got to take your hat off to them. And the reason they've done such a great job, because they've been doing this for thousands of years. It's not something that started, 2 decades ago or 100 years ago. This is something that's been going on since the Sumerian Tablets were started to being written and molded by the Sumerians, and all the scribes and all the information that was started being captured in those Sumerian Tablets, and even prior to that in oral tradition about the gods, and in all the mythology, oral tradition that comes down. That mythology is just a record of human history that has been sworn to be accurate and true by priests and kings. So when you would say the word mythology, from the original Greek word mythos, and prior to that as well, obviously, from its other prior origins before Greek, mythos actually means a sworn testimony of human history and past events. It has nothing to do with imaginary or fairy tale stories. So human mythology is actually probably a lot closer to human history than anything we read in our modern history books.
Well, and when we think of the gods of the Bible, and I'm just saying the Bible, and this, and not even of the Bible, when we think of God in the general sense of the word, our first thought is this loving, overlooking God who's there listening to our complaints and taking care of us. But when you look at mythology or really investigate the stories in the Bible, more in mythology, it's like the gods are anything but that. They're constantly fighting. They're conniving against each other. They're trying to, take control, and it seems like there is this ongoing battle for control.
Yeah. And that's exactly what it is. And this is also very important to the distinction that I draw in my book, Slave Species of God, is I draw the distinction very, very strongly between the gods with the small g, or the Elohim, or the Nephilim, and the Anakim, and whoever they were, these malicious beings that were, vengeful and controlling and asserted their control over humanity that they cloned and created to be their slaves, and that's very, very clear. And so these are the gods with the small g that I call. Just advanced beings with knowledge of genetic science and technology and so forth, as opposed to the God with a big G, or the divine creative source of all things, or the divine creator, the God that doesn't want gold, is not interested in gold. It's an insane thought. The source of unity consciousness from which everything comes and emerges. and that is responsible for the unity field, all the stuff that the scientists have been grappling with and trying to get to the point and the source, that is the source of all things that makes up the universe, and that's what I would refer to as the God with a big G, which has got nothing to do with the manipulation in the Bible. However, the information about the source field and the source, the God with a big G, the consciousness that permeates everything in creation, in space, that is responsible for the electromagnetic fields that make up the universe and the source of the energy, the stuff behind everything, where does it all come from? Let's call that God with a big G. And that's spectacular, because when you hear God in the Bible, or the Elohim, tell Adam about gold, that's where you can draw the line and this distinction between the God with a big G and the gods with a small g, and the twain shall never meet. What I find absolutely mind-boggling is that scholars and researchers that have been studying this for decades still make a mistake. They still cross that line, and they get confused between, the gods with a small g and the divine creative source of all things, or God with a big G. And they cross that line all the time, and then they get confused. But how can this be? And why is God doing this and all that? And say, just, dude, don't go there. Stop crossing the line,
Where I think it gets really interesting is when you get into the whole Moses story, because the God that they're interacting with on Mount Sinai is going, I'm your God, and if any of these other guys, text you or something, don't talk to them, because they're not your God. I'm your God. I will take care of you, blah, blah, blah. I mean, we know the story, but it just seems like there's this control being exerted over these people. And if you think about it, the whole Judeo-Christian tradition really stems from that encounter.
Yeah, the Judeo-Christian and Muslim, Islam all come from Abraham, really, right? So Abraham is the founding father and recognized in all three of those religious movements. And it's all the problems in the world come from those three movements, isn't it? That's where we have most of the problems in the world.
Well, and I'm gonna throw in one other little piece with that, Rabbi. I told you I was kind of shocked. Yeah. One of the things that he said, and this is just between us, was that the God of Abraham was El Shaddai, which translate as the mountain. And so kind of in our chronology, I think that they were interacting with Enki.
Yeah.
And then this other group came in, or Enlil or whoever that was, and basically said, nah, you don't want to hang out with him.
Yeah. And it's again, it's just completely unthinkable that it's completely unthinkable that the divine source, God with a big G, would interfere in people's lives, would come and tell you, don't go there, don't do this, don't do that. That's not how unity works. We come from the same source. Everything comes from the same source of unity, and it's our division and our separation. It's our divided and our ego mind that plays a very important role in the separation and what is often described as the fall from grace, or the fall from heaven and the fallen angels and so forth. There's a lot of important information that lies behind all those activities and those events that are inextricably linked to our state of being, our state of mind, our insane egos that we have inherited, and why we are such a divided and separated world, the species as human race. It's quite spectacular. How you can also divide the God with a big G from the gods with a small G is when you get instructions to Joshua to go into the promised land, and invade every city, town, and village and kill every man, woman, child, and beast in the name of God, because if you don't, they might try and convince you to believe and follow their God or their gods. And it's just unthinkable that humanity could behave so violently and so brutally. And the only conclusion you can reach, that they did that because of fear. And that's the main driving force after looking at everything in our lives today as the human race. Fear seems to be the most powerful driving motivator behind what it is we do today. We fear everything. We fear death. We fear our neighbor. We fear disease. We fear losing our jobs, getting old. We fear everything. We just fear everywhere, you know. And it's just spectacular. When, you know, we only here for a few years and we're going to die. So what's the worst thing that's going to happen to you? You're going to die, buddy. Well, I've got news for you, you know. We're all going to die. And what is it that we do with this time that we're here? And that's when the whole enlightenment and waking up and start to think about what this all means becomes so important. And this is where all the so-called New Age movements play a very important role, the rapid enlightenment that we find. Why is it that people are waking up so suddenly all over the world? Is there a reason behind it? Of course there is a reason behind it. There's a reason for everything. But you've got to be prepared to learn and explore and read everything that crosses your desk or your field of research. Otherwise, it's just not going to make any sense to you. And that's what I find. That's what I find the problem is with most people that choose, and academics, and I have to say that academics that follow, you know, mainstream academia, that stay in their one area of expertise or research, they do not learn about all these other areas. You know, you, me, and other people that are out there doing our work outside the mainstream academia. I come from the mainstream academia, for God's sake. I spent 5 years at the most established, most prestigious university in South Africa that has produced some of the greatest minds in the world. Right? I spent 5 years there. So I come from that academic institution, only to look back at it now and think, my goodness, what they are doing to those poor people is just damaging them for the rest of their lives. And once you come out of that institutionalized academia, you have to do everything you can to deprogram what has been programmed into you, because that is another spectacular deception. The whole education system is just a program to turn human beings and children into marching soldiers, to march to the beat of the drum of those that control the planet and want us to go into jobs and have a career, so that after 40 years in a career you can retire, get a golden watch, and go and sit on a beach somewhere and then count your money, and then you die. And, you know, thank goodness you died, otherwise I have to keep looking after you. It's just, the deception is so spectacular.
But do you think that the gods, the small g gods, are still here exerting that control? Or do you think that we were just really good students and learned how to control and manipulate that way from the gods, and it's mankind's agenda against man?
Absolutely, unequivocally, I believe, not only in the words. And now I've got a complete blank, so this is highly embarrassing. The wonderful Bill. Sorry, I had a complete blank here now, and this is highly embarrassing. But anyway, we are not alone. We've never been alone, and the ETs play an incredibly important part of the human control. They will be at the top of the command chain, at the U.S. government, at the global governments, the banking institutions, the banking families. They'll ultimately all be taking their instructions from a group of ETs that are running the show. The fact that we don't see them isn't because we're stupid or they just really, they're hiding really well. It's just they don't want us to see them. They don't want us to find them. And we're just incredibly ignorant as to what's really going on. So if they don't want us to see them, we're not going to see them. It's the equivalent of a farmer who's got a bunch of sheep on the farm. If the farmer doesn't want to know, doesn't want the sheep to know what TV channels he watches at night, the sheep are never going to know that. That's as simple as that. So we're never going to know for now, for the short future, I believe. That's going to change. That's going to change with the times that we're in right now. For right now, it's difficult to find out where these controlling beings are, where they operate from, where they live. Once you got the advanced technology, you can, materialize and dematerialize, or have craft that you can step into, create a vacuum source around yourself and move rapidly from one place to another within seconds without actually dematerializing, but use other advanced technology that we can only dream of. You can live anywhere. You can be anywhere on this planet, and we won't even know about it.
Well, and, myth supports the notion that there is a group that lives underwater, that there are some people that live in, deep caverns in the earth, and so they could be here. I just interviewed Anthony Sanchez, and, his material talks about that there's actually his focus is on the Dulce base in New Mexico, and the information he has is that there's this subterranean base. It's 7 levels. His facts were just so interesting. It's 7 levels deep, that there are multiple races of ETs that live on this base, and that the U.S. government has been interacting with them. And it's like,
Yeah, that's. Are you referring to Dulce, where the ET revolution took place, or something to that effect?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. During my I've done three tours of the United States now in 3 successive years, as you know. On my second trip in 2011, I met a guy in I think it was Seattle. Yeah, it was in Seattle. My presentation in Seattle, that came to me during the break or afterwards, and told me he was part of either the Marines or the National Guard. I can't remember which of the groups it was, and he was called in with a bunch of guys. They were armed to the teeth. They were given a very brief drill, chucked into the back of these military vehicles, and they were driven to Dulce. And before they were let out and given the instructions what to do, they were told something to the following effect. They were told that they were going to see things today that they never imagined in their wildest dreams they would see. They were going to see creatures and beings that don't look human, and they are not human. And their instructions are to shoot and kill. Whatever you see, if it comes out of the hole, you shoot to kill. And he was part of the group of soldiers that were there and just shooting on sight. Any being or creature that came out of the hole, out of the ground, was shot. And it was a very interesting story that he told me, what he saw.
Well, and when you hear something like that, I mean, when you read Anthony's book, if you just had that book by itself, you would go, well, that's a bunch of crap.
Yeah.
And just way too out there. But then when you get material like yours, or the material that I present in my new book, Man-Made, and other people's material, what they're saying, I mean, because they're UFO guys, so, maybe not their area, but when you start looking at the ancient mythology and, where we come from, it totally fits in and makes sense.
Yeah. And also, once again, let's remind your listeners, what do all ancient cultures have in common? One of the things they have in common, okay, they have a lot of things in common, but one of the things they have in common, one of the most important things they have in common, they all tell us, every single one of them, tell us that we come from the stars, that our ancestors came from the sky, that they were star people. That's it. That's as simple as that. If you try and twist that information, you're lying to yourself, or you're twisting the information from the ancient civilizations, because that is not, they certainly do not believe that we evolved out of apes. And that's part of the convoluted, distorted story that has been enforced on us. And then the creationists, those that believe in God created us, turn God into some guy with a long beard that sits in the clouds, that somehow miraculously created Adam and Eve, these beautiful beings that lived in this beautiful garden, and Adam and Eve were both white. Did you notice they were always white? Isn't that fascinating? And Adam and Eve were white. So, and that I found that quite interesting. Even as a young child, I kept thinking, well, if Adam and Eve were white, then where did black people come from? And then at school we were taught, that black people are black because their skin changed to absorb and be able to absorb more of the sun and resist the sun, so they wouldn't get skin cancer and stuff like that, and that's why they're black, and that's why you're white, because you live in parts of the world that is not so hot, and crap like that, and you go, hold on, well, this doesn't wash with me. It means that black people evolved out of white people? What kind of rubbish is that? And it's just spectacular. That'll go down well with the white extremists, right, who still try and peddle that kind of philosophy. But all that this kind of disinformation does eventually catches up with it. It catches up with itself and starts to show you how completely nonsensical those kind of stories are. And what becomes really fascinating is the information that I've been finding from the vanished civilizations of Southern Africa, here in South Africa, and Enki's calendar, or what I called Adam's calendar, how accurate that is, the birthplace of humanity. What did these first humans look like? They certainly didn't look anything like we look today. And that you start seeing the source, the genetic source of humanity is totally different to the different race groups that we have on Earth today.
And Michael, we're going to go to a commercial break here in like 2 minutes. And so why don't we save that conversation, because that's a huge conversation, for after the break. But one of the things that I find interesting is that if you really take a step back and look at the concept of, one guy in heaven, the guy with the white beard, blah, 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 the whole biblical story, it's only the people in the Western world, the Judeo-Christian society, that have that as a base belief. Because when you interact with the Native Americans, they just automatically, they're star people. When you start reading anything that comes out of India, I mean, they got giants running around and people flying around in ships, and that's just part of their cosmology. It seems like it's just, the Europeans or, the people that were, biblically based that are really kind of brainwashed.
Yeah. Absolutely, it's fantastic. It's a fantastic deception, and it becomes very clear the more you study it. But here's a kicker for you, because most people don't do this little exercise. You've got the most powerful religious movement in the world today, the Roman Catholic Church, right? Well, where did the Roman Catholic Church come from? What preceded the Roman Catholic Church? It was the Roman Church. And what did the Roman Church believe in? The Roman Church believed in the gods, right? The Roman religion. They believed in all the Roman gods and these beings that controlled their lives, and they didn't imagine that they were there. They believed they were there. They feared them. They interacted with them. And then they changed from the Roman Church, the Roman religion, and all the Roman so-called mythological gods, and they added one important word, the word Catholic. So it went from the Roman Church to the Roman Catholic Church, and everything changes. It's spectacular.
Well, they got rid of all those other pesky gods that were hanging around in the pantheon and just installed one guy. I mean, that part too.
Yeah.
Anyway, the music's going to be coming up, so why don't we take a little break here and come back on the backside. I'm Dr. Rita Louise. We're here talking to Michael Tellinger about his book, Slave Species of God. His webpage is slavespecies.com and ZuluPlanet.com. I don't have that in front of me. And we'll be back with Michael after these words from our sponsors.
Just Energy Radio with your host, Dr. Rita Louise, will return right after these messages.